Testing, testing, testing. Good. Hello. Good afternoon, everybody. Welcome to Go to 10. It's so great to see so many of you here today. Super excited. My name is Ulli, and I work at the Swedish Internet Foundation, or in Swedish we say Internetstiftelsen. And we are the ones behind this fantastic place and community, Go to 10. Now, over the years, we've had a lot of events and visits, just like this one today, here at Go to 10, but I gotta say, Stanford University hits different. So an extra warm welcome to you, Professor Schiebinger. Thank you so much for being here today, and here's to welcoming you for the first time in Linköping, hopefully not the last one. So who are we, Internetstiftelsen? What do we do? How do we fit into the whole innovation system of Linköping and Östergötland, and even Sweden, right? Quite simply, or not so simply, but still interesting, we make sure that the crucial, the most important infrastructure of Swedish domains is well managed and working properly. And when I say Swedish domains, I mean anything and everything that ends with .se and .nu. So there's a lot of work with hardware, cables to be plugged in, plugged out. So you get the idea, research, a lot of DNS labs work, etc. But there's also a soft skill part of that as well. You see, we do love internet, and we want people to feel the same way in Sweden. We want them to be better at using internet, to feel safer, to be smarter users of it. So that's where the whole educational kind of agenda of ours comes in. And also the innovative part of it as well. And it's not a coincidence that we had chosen to come here to Mjärvi in the IT hub of Linköping to be here, because this is where we feel we innovate the most. By bringing people together every day, researchers, startuppers, professionals, students, you name it, everybody, different perspectives, different backgrounds. Let them meet, let them discuss things, innovate together, come up with that sparkle that otherwise would have never happened if it wasn't for the physical part of it. So that's where the opening doors, inspiring each other comes in. And this is how we feel we contribute to this amazing innovative system of ours. And it's such a pleasure and privilege to do it together with the Linköping University and the Linköping Science Park. I'm waving at you guys, so thank you so much for this collaboration. That was very short about us. I'm going to pass you to you, Leah, from Linköping Science Park. We're going to talk a lot about innovation and one of your amazing projects. So welcome.
Thank you, Ulli. Yeah. My name is Julia. I work at Linköping Science Park, and I'm just going to mention short about how we try to focus our work about inclusive innovation. And we have a network called East Sweden Tech Women, which is a network for women and non-binary individuals within the tech sector. We have a LinkedIn group, and so far at the moment 400 members. We co-host and co-arrange events just like these to support what we call the brilliant minds in the region and to foster tech with a purpose. So I would recommend you to join the group on LinkedIn and just to keep updated on our future and upcoming events that we do. We do events like study visits, lunch lectures, and so on. And before we move on, I would just like to mention a few words about IGE Day, the Introduce a Girl to Engineering Day that is coming up at the 20th of March. And we plan to arrange a breakfast meetup where we have invited Dr. Ulrika Sultan, who will inspire young girls and companies. And this is a way to, if you plan to arrange IGE Day, this is a way to do it as a part of your agenda to kick off the day. So we are at the moment accepting, what would you say, expressions of interest to see if you would like to join. So I will be here today if you have any more questions, and you could read more by scanning the QR code. But that's actually enough from me. So I will now hand over to Erica Johnson.
Thank you. And actually, you don't want to hear me speak. We want to listen to Londa Schiebinger. So I'm just going to introduce you quickly. Londa Schiebinger, Stanford University, amazing history of technology and history of science person that I read as a graduate student many, many years ago, but who has been more recently working on gendered innovations and developing a really incredible resource on gendered innovations that is a website that people can use to find information about how gender and an intersectional approach to innovation can really change what sort of tech we develop. And I think you're going to talk a little bit about that and about the history of it. So I'm just going to turn the floor over to you and say thank you so much for being here, for engaging us at this lunch seminar. Thank you also to Linköping Science Park for treating us to lunch, and to Go210 for hosting us. And the floor is yours.
Thank you. So it's a pleasure to be here. There's a quiz afterwards, so pay attention. This sounds a little weird. Is it sounding okay? Okay. All right. These were not designed for women, but let's let's not go there exactly. So I've been asked today to speak about gendered innovations, and following this session, there is a gendered innovations intersectional design cards session that maybe some of you are coming to. So Gendered Innovations was founded in 2009 and produced through a large international collaboration involving the European Commission, the U.S. National Science Foundation, and Stanford University. New policies have been implemented across Europe, Canada, the U.S., South Korea, and Japan. And we also work in Silicon Valley with industry leaders such as Apple and Google. That's who the design cards are for, because we realize that industry people don't want to read long texts. And even though the text on my website is super short, we made cards for them. So even shorter and easier to just immediately grab. And our website has been enjoyed by 2.5 million unique users across 185 countries, which I've found wonderful, surprising, and great. So innovation is about integrating sex, gender, and intersectional analysis into the design of research. So the operative question is, can we harness the creative power of gender analysis for discovery and innovation? Does this approach add valuable dimensions to research? Does it take research into new directions? So first, a bit of background. I don't know if you're new to these topics or not, but governments and universities in the US and Western Europe have taken 3 strategic approaches to gender equality. I was going to say equity, but you call it equality. So gender, and what you mean, I learned yesterday, by gender equality is much more encompassing than what we mean with those particular words. Then we have many other words we use. But anyway, there are 3 basic strategic approaches to gender equality over the past several decades. The first is Fix the Numbers, which focuses on increasing the numbers of women and underrepresented groups in science and engineering. And the second is Fix the Institutions, which promotes equity in careers through structural change in research organizations. Obviously, if you bring new people in, they need to be made to feel comfortable. And the third is Fix the Knowledge, or gendered innovation, which stimulates excellence in science and technology by integrating sex, gender, and intersectional analysis into research. So gendered innovations focuses on this third strategic approach, fixing the knowledge. It's the newest area and the most important for the future of science, innovation, and human knowledge. The goal is to create science and technology that works for everyone across the whole of society while enhancing environmental sustainability. So we distinguish these 3 fixes, but in reality they work together. Although many people try to fix the numbers first, we will not fix the numbers unless we also fix the knowledge or the design or the content of what it is you're doing. So let me give a quick example of the link between who does science and what science is created. And here's a question. Why are there so few women surgeons? Well, there are many reasons, but one is the size of surgical instruments and the strength required to use them. 70% of women surgeons, 70%, report that the instruments do not fit their hands. And in this case, the surgical instruments reinforce women's exclusion, historical exclusion from surgery. And here we already have an innovation. You know, this is the second time the way I create my slides doesn't actually translate into Swedish. But anyway, they have more design than is shown here. That got stripped away somehow. So this is a gendered innovation in surgical instruments. It's a stapler for colon surgery. I'm sorry it's so soon after lunch. But the traditional manual version requires too much grip strength, making it difficult for women or smaller people to use. So very simply, the instrument has been automated. How simple was that? It's a power stapler, so it's easy for anyone to use. This allows more people to be surgeons and also leads to better outcomes for patients because you have more control. So it's a win-win. I met the designers in Japan last year. I did a lecture tour in Japan, and they're now working with all surgical instrument companies in Japan to check that instruments work for a broad segment of the population. So how might all of this be relevant to your research? Beginning in 2020, the European Commission's Horizon Europe strengthened their gender dimension in research. That's what you all call it, the gender dimension. Applicants are now required to integrate sex, gender, and/or intersectional analysis into the design of research or to justify that it's not relevant. So the idea is, and this is important, the idea is that if taxpayer money is used, the research should benefit everyone. So policy is great, but often scientists and engineers have not been taught sex, gender, and intersectional analysis in their professional training, and they don't know how to do it at the highest level of sophistication. So to support their policy, the EU held a 2-year expert group, which I directed, and the group consisted of 25 experts. Sophia was one of these 25. Right here, you have a living representative of one of these 25 experts from numerous fields of science, from biomedicine, marine science, machine learning, and environmental sciences. And our results are published here. The book is easy to find. You can download it. It's free. And you can also see most of the materials on the Gendered Innovations website. Okay, so now that I've set the stage, I'm going to turn to intersectional analysis, which is probably newer to you. Probably you're already familiar with sex analysis and gender analysis, but intersectional analysis might be newer. So we start with some examples of bias along single axes of analysis, so not intersecting axes, but single axes. So first, let's take search engines. In Google search, let's say you're searching for a job. And in the search results that appear, men are 5 times more likely than women to be offered ads for high-paying jobs. So why is that? Google loves equality, right? They are really dedicated to working for everyone. So it has to do, of course, with data and search algorithms. Men in the US, on average, are still paid 16% more than women on average. And this algorithm has been designed to get the ad to the right person. So in this case, the ad for a high-paying job would go to a man, and this perpetuates the cycle of inequalities. Now, once engineers become aware of these problems, they can fix it. Or let's take another example, the example of computer vision. In computer vision, a photograph of a traditional US bride dressed in white is correctly labeled bride, dress, woman, wedding, but a photograph of a beautiful North Indian bride is mislabeled as performance art, red, costume. So why is that? It's because 45% of the images in ImageNet, which fuels a lot of the computer vision, comes from the US, even though we represent only 4% of the population. By contrast, China and India together constitute just 3% of the ImageNet data, even though these countries represent 36% of the world's population. So we need data sets with appropriate geodiversity. Or let's go on to health technology. Pulse oximeters don't work for people with darker skin, as we learned in the pandemic. This was a disaster. People with darker skin got themselves to the emergency rooms, and then the technology looking at the oxygen in their blood was wrong. So why don't these work for people with darker skin? Because the near infrared technology confuses melanin, or the color in the skin, with oxygen in the blood. So analysis from 47,000 readings found that oximeters misread blood gases 12% of the time in patients with darker skin, compared to only 4% of the time in patients with lighter skin. So this puts patients at serious risk for conditions like heart disease. Or let's take the CPR dummies. This is one of my new favorite examples. So as you know, maybe you were all trained for emergency medical situations using a CPR dummy. You learn to resuscitate people who have had heart attacks or other emergencies. So what problem do you see here? Yes, they're all flat-chested. So people don't really know how to resuscitate women. So women who need CPR are 27% less likely than men to receive it. And there are interesting innovations in this area, which we could talk about during the Q&A. So, yeah. They're in diverse skin tones, which I find interesting, but the ones with breasts have only appeared since about 2019. It's really, really pretty amazing. So each of these examples is important, but what did you notice about them? Each example focused on only one social dimension in isolation, either gender with the Google search, geographic location with the computer vision, or skin tone with the pulse oximeter, or sex differences with the CPR dummies. So here we want to focus on a higher level problem, and that's intersectionality. So what is intersectionality, or an intersectional approach? So intersectionality describes overlapping or intersecting forms of discrimination related to, and you can fill in any list here that you want, related to sex, gender, ethnicity, disabilities, socioeconomic status, sexuality, geographic location. The term was coined in 1989, so a long time ago, by legal scholar Kimberly Crenshaw. And let me show you how this works in research on facial recognition done by Joy Buolamwini, shown here, called Gender Shades. While a graduate student at MIT, Joy learned that the system she was developing, the facial recognition system she was developing, could not see her face because she's a black woman. So her system couldn't see her until she put on a white mask. So instead of working further on facial recognition, she turned to really social science and did this paper called Gender Shades. So Gender Shades studies intersectionality, specifically how sex and race intersect. I called it skin tone here, she calls it race, and showed that facial recognition can't see black women's faces well. So the gender analysis shows that the system performed better on men's faces than women's faces. The skin tone analysis showed that the system performed better on lighter skin than darker skin. And then the intersectional analysis is what we're interested in. So the system performed worst for black women. The error rates were 35% for darker skinned women, 12% getting better for darker skinned men, 7% for lighter skinned women, and then almost no error rate for lighter skinned men because they had used themselves as the model to develop the system. But there's more. We could do a sexuality analysis, and systems often can't recognize transgender faces, especially during the transition periods. So here we have an intersectional innovation. Buolamwini and her co-author Gebru created a more inclusive data set that includes the faces of men and women of darker and lighter skin from members of parliament from 6 countries, 3 in Africa and 3 in Europe. But what problem do you see? So is the data set inclusive globally? No. My students see it right away. Immediately, we see there are no Asians, there are no Pacific Islanders, there are no indigenous peoples from the Americas or from Australia. And we don't know if there are any non-binary people imaged. So we still need innovations to make sure that the technology works for everyone. And of course, there have been many, many critiques of facial recognition, but I'm not going to go into those now. So Gendered Innovations released a tool for intersectionality. These are our intersectional design cards, and I was surprised when we won a design award in the UK. That's my designers, not me. And our cards define 12 factors that we think are important for intersectional design. So we chose these 12. You could add to them. And here, interestingly, is Apple's intersections of diverse axes to empower and delight everyone. They want your business. They want it to work for you. So I find their list very interesting. They have some of the classics, such as class, culture, ethnicity. I'm sorry, you can't see. There's no place to move. Language, education. I find philosophical beliefs really interesting. How would you know that? I don't know any country that adds that to their census. Like, what are your philosophical beliefs? And I mean, how would you fill that in even? But, you know, I find some of these interesting, and I really like handedness. The Stanford faculty live on campus. We all have our own houses, so I don't know if you know our dormitory system. It's like living in a dorm, except you have your own house. And my neighbor, so all of my neighbors are Stanford faculty, which is just a lot of fun. I have an experimental physicist, a theoretical physicist, and then the hand surgeon. So one of my friends, my neighbor to the back, is a world-class hand surgeon. She works only on the thumb. I mean, that's where we are, right? And what's interesting is that she's left-handed, and all of the surgical instruments are made for right-handers. So think how amazing she could be if the instruments had met her needs rather than her meeting the instrument's needs. So now there are several things to point out here. So first, both of these lists I've shown you were developed in a US context. So you may want to make a different list. For instance, I know a lot of Europeans can't collect data on race, so that wouldn't make sense for you, but there may be other issues here like migration or something that would be better on the list. But because you design for global cultures, you may need to think of factors beyond just Swedish culture. Now, a second point to make is that each researcher needs to focus on the factors relevant to their research, to their product, or to their project. You can't look at them all, but you need to choose what to focus on. It shouldn't be a default decision. So that's what we're after. Now, so far in my presentation, I've talked about intersectional analysis at the social factor level, sort of our social identities. So both of these lists I showed you focus on personal categories of identity. But I want to take a few minutes to introduce you to our Nature paper published last April that takes a more planetary view, which is so crucial today. So in this paper, we conceptualize intersectional factors at 3 interconnected levels. So first, the socio-political dimensions, which are our familiar dimensions, such as sex, gender, ethnicity, caste, maybe religion, sexuality. These are embedded in the larger contextual domains where you have the legal systems, the healthcare systems, the educational systems. And these 2 levels are further embedded in environmental conditions or the planetary system, such as air, soil, and water quality. So it's understanding the push and pull of these three basic levels that is important for intersectional analysis. So our analysis might look something like this, with three nested domains. So this image is available on the Gendered Innovations website. There were many reasons we didn't include it in the Nature paper, but that's a topic for another day. So let's see how this works with the example of plastic pollution, which is a huge problem now, microplastics, nanoplastics. And our example is from the fast fashion industry. So fast fashion is mass-produced, trendy, but low-quality clothing. So fast fashion is fueled here by consumer purchasing. So here we consider things at the socio-political level. Consumer demands differs by ethnicity, gender, disability, other social factors. Then fast fashion produces plastic fiber when polyester is laundered. So every time you launder your clothes, if they're not natural fabrics, they're releasing this plastic into the water. And these microplastics discharge into the ocean, which takes us into this environmental realm, the environmental level. And in the oceans, these plastics have sex-specific effects on living organisms like fish. So, for example, BPA disrupts reproduction, metabolism, and development in clams, for instance, where the larger females experience greater exposure to harm. Then these plastics that are eaten by the fish, and we just had shrimp, so you're full of plastic. I hope you have a nice afternoon digesting that. So that brings us back down. It's eaten by the marine organs and enters the human food supply into our food system, which brings us to the contextual social domain. And here, the chemicals enter our food. A recent study estimated that an average person consumes 74 to 120,000 particles, plastic particles per year. And importantly then, this consumption brings us back down to the socio-political domain because particle consumption differs by age and sex, dietary patterns, educational background, geographic location. So now we've come full circle. So I'm sure you would have examples of how this would work too. So there are numerous innovations in this clothing space, and I'll mention just one, a fully biodegradable Japanese sneaker made in part from seaweed, so I guess you could eat that as well. Then we published a second paper just last month, and this presents guidelines for intersectional analysis. Can you read it? Is it too tiny? I'll give you all an eye exam. So it presents guidelines for intersectional analysis in science and technology, primarily for peer-reviewed journal editors, and also then for researchers and for funding agencies. These guidelines have been endorsed by the European Association for Science Editors, and we've now launched a campaign for peer-reviewed journals to accept them. So if you're an editor of a journal, please make our guidelines available to your authors. These guidelines serve as a roadmap for quantitative intersectional analysis. A lot of intersectional analysis has been qualitative, but this is specifically quantitative for science and engineering. The goal is to reset the research default to include intersectional analysis where appropriate. Precision in research best guides effective social and environmental policies and in turn enhance global equity and sustainability. Now I was going to talk about gendering robots, but I think it's too long. So I'm just going to sneak through here and come to Gemini. Okay, so now I'm going to talk for just a few minutes about aspirational AI. So a huge literature has emerged on algorithmic bias and how to correct it. And Google takes these issues very seriously, but ran into problems. So let's look quickly at what happened with Google Gemini. This was early 2024, and I'm sure you heard about it. So this was the image Gemini returned when people put in the prompt, show the US founders. So that would be people like George Washington, Alexander Hamilton, John Adams. You may know that those are all white men, right? Founded the US. And so they were white men in the 1790s and not Native Americans, not Black or Asian men. So this was a disaster. The image was diverse, and what I imagine is that there was an earnest Stanford graduate who went to work for Google, which is about 20 minutes down the road, and they thought, oh yes, Professor Schiebinger told us we must value diversity. So they put into the algorithm that you must return an image that shows diversity. So Google apologized and said that the outcomes were an unforeseen result of its efforts to ensure that the product appealed, this is what they said, the product appealed to a range of users around the world. So this is precisely what I would have taught, but it's not historically accurate. And I'm not an expert on AI, so I don't know how you tell the algorithms when you want historical reality versus where you want aspirational AI. So the question becomes, what do we want our AI systems to do? Do we want them to reflect reality, even if that reality is unfair? Or do we want them to show us a future that we may be aspiring to? So it's complicated, but we want our companies to create a virtuous circle that I was talking about with the robots. So we want companies to create this virtuous cycle where we know we have gender norms, all kinds of norms in society, but engineers have the opportunity to challenge those norms with the kind of tech that they create. That's what I see Google was doing at that time. And then these technologies can promote gender equality in the society because people are seeing something new. This influences users who then change our culture. I'm a historian. We study cultural change, and that would be what our goal is. So let's see, oh yes, okay. So here is a very successful example of aspirational media. So we can point to this very successful Bridgerton series. Did you in Sweden watch that also? Yes, I watched all 3 seasons. And this is where the British Queen Charlotte, who's the real person over there, was portrayed by a beautiful Black woman. And this was the purpose, Rhonda, what's her name, Rhonda Shimes. This was her purpose, was to show Black people in the British aristocracy in the 18th century, something that didn't happen in reality, but should happen today. So it's fiction, and it shows a different historical reality. So far, now, we've considered things from a US and European point of view, but you want to market your products globally. So let's say that you're developing the next chat GPT, and surely your success will be greater if you develop it with global cultures in mind. An interesting recent article by Google researchers demonstrated what they called the non-portability of Western frameworks that can lead to flawed data and model assumptions that overlook culturally specific axes of discrimination. So let's look at LLMs. Sam Altman, the CEO of ChatGPT, was shocked, for example, when he learned that more than 2,000 African languages are not represented in artificial intelligence, meaning that large numbers of Africans can't engage or buy his large language models. So LLMs were developed first and foremost from and for English, not Yoruba or other African languages, not even French or Spanish for that matter. ChatGPT performs significantly better in English than in French. English has a far larger digital footprint on the internet, which serves as, of course, the primary source for ChatGPT's training data, leading to more fluent, complex, and accurate responses in English compared to French, which has been studied. So here we have a global innovation, a new project largely funded by the Gates Foundation has now recorded 9,000 hours of people speaking 18 African languages and has transformed those recording into digitized language data sets. So this data will be made available to train LLMs and make these AI tools available to more people globally. Okay, so that's all I'm going to say now. We want to have a discussion. I hope that I've begun to show that designing intersectional analysis into research is one crucial component contributing to world-class science and technology. And I'm not going to discuss policy, but I want to say one thing you can do if you're students or graduate students or professors, or if you have a research lab where you teach people things. The greatest barrier to implementing gendered innovations is that researchers in the natural sciences, health and medicine, and engineering typically don't know how to do sophisticated sex-gender analysis, and even fewer know what intersectionality is. So here we have a real opportunity. And this is the crucial element that is missing. We need to integrate this type of analysis into the core curriculum in engineering or computer science. So at the same time that you're learning how to code, a co-teacher would be teaching you the possible social outcomes of different algorithms and that sort of thing. So we need this to happen in CS, in medicine, and many parts of the natural sciences. So that's really the next frontier, and that's what I expect you to do. Thank you. Yeah, I wanted to save time for discussion.
Yeah, thank you very much. So the floor is open. If there's anybody who's got questions right away. Helene?
Thanks for a great presentation. Super interesting and important. In your framework there, you had technology, engineers, users. Where do you see data fitting in? Do you see it as part of technology, or is that, in my head, it was almost like another part there, but I guess it's included.
Well, this is just a simplification, right? So I think that data would fit in where the scientists or engineers or whoever is developing this. So that would be where the data would fit in. Yeah.
Hi, I'm Oskar Spak at Linköping Science Park, who work with the AI projects. I thought your Gemini example is really interesting because I saw two parts of that. One was the knowledge of the users who used the product and what they wanted to deliver. And one big problem was that this was a generative model that produced what the user asked for. And if it didn't ask specifically for a Caucasian male founder, it gave a diverse response. So in a sense, I thought it was good that they tried to deliver a diverse response when the user wasn't that specific. But it felt wrong when it portrayed historical figures. But I was wondering, how would you tell a user that? How would you educate a user as a product service deliverer for how to use the product in a good way?
Well, isn't it really your responsibility? I think users are very naive. Some of them are, I hope only teenagers. You know, I think that so I don't do AI myself. I really don't know how you create the technology, but I wonder what you do think. How would the technologist somehow, how can you make the LLM recognize when it's a historical example versus, I mean, that's really a high level cognition, right? Versus just, well, just show me stuff, right? I mean, because there have been so many problems with the just show me stuff. When you ask the machine to show you CEOs, you get, you know, lots of men and a few young women. They're always like young and beautiful, which is not necessarily the requirement for a CEO. And you don't get very many ethnically diverse people. So I think, I mean, that came under huge attack, right? And so probably Google or whoever has fixed it. But how would a technologist make the machine understand, you know, what people are really after? So you as founders, that sounds like, well, I mean, that could be company founders. Founders is vague, right? So, yeah. But I don't use ChatGPT much, but it often asks me a question. So I ask it to summarize some books that I have to read for my graduate student, and it will say, well, do you want this in bullet points, or do you want, I mean, you know, do you want this in academic style? So maybe the machines could ask you a question. I mean, I don't know. What do? You tell me.
Yeah, I agree. I think the models have been developed in that way because the user are usually uneducated on how the new tools should work or could work. And it was it's very interesting if you look at it that the generative model of making a picture was more like an artist and not a historical correct answer, like if you go to Wikipedia or if you go to so that's a big difference. But I think the hard part is to, especially when you develop these new tools, is to help the user to find out. And I think asking
You're putting it back on us.
Asking a direct question.
Yeah.
Did you mean the founding fathers? What do you want the historical correct image of this? I can get it for you. And I think they are more like that today. So it was a hit and miss with Gemini, but I think they kind of go into it, but it's
so they can ask, the machine can then ask you what your intention, more about your intention.
Yeah, and I think we need to do that because we are uneducated on a lot of stuff, and to get help with that and to broaden our perspectives from an LLM is, I think that's a good way to use them.
Good.
Yeah.
I won't tell you how common it is in a group of predominantly women listeners that a man will ask the first question. Now, this is a deep cultural issue, but I'm just saying. But thank you.
Thank you. Very interesting presentation. I'm Lena. And I was wondering, like, what would be the incentives to change the opinions of policymakers and developers to actually integrate this knowledge into the algorithms and the technology? Because I believe many of us who listen to you, we find it like this is something obvious, something we should do. But we are also mostly women here, and I'm very grateful to see some men in the audience. How do we influence the decision makers and the policy makers?
Well, I think that, so if we talk about funding agencies, the European Commission has had rocket science on policy way back, at least in 2014 with Horizon 2020. I forget the exact dates of all these, but they asked for sex and gender analysis. And then with Horizon Europe, they added intersectional, though they don't always demand it yet. So I think, and then a lot of policymakers have followed the European Commission's example. And I know in the United States, NIH asked for sex as a biological variable. They never asked for gender. I think they were about to move on to gender, but you know, everything has been destroyed in the United States now. But a lot of, I talk a lot to funding agencies, and they're very keen on these kinds of things, to not think just about the people who apply and the balance there, but What about the knowledge that is being corrected? So there aren't incentives you can give to the funders. They have to be policymakers who value democracy and who are looking for strategies to enhance, new knowledge and that sort of thing. But the funders can give incentives to the researchers, right? So the European Commission, for a while, offered extra money, and so did NIH, the National Institutes of Health in the US, offered money for people to include both sex and to include both sexes if they're mice or something. The people who study mice in the laboratory say, oh, it's so expensive to have both female and male. They don't even think about other models beyond the binary. But, it's too expensive to have these mice, all these mice. So NIH was offering extra money. Money is no reason you're not doing it, right? So the funding agencies can offer incentives. And then the peer-reviewed journals, they don't need to offer incentives because you get published in Nature or you get published in the Lancet if you include these elements. So 6,000 peer-reviewed journals have accepted the SAGER guidelines, which are the guidelines for sex and gender analysis in papers, 6,000. So you should have that where it's relevant. Now, often the reviewers don't know sufficiently, which is, a weak point. We have this vicious cycle that if you're not taught these sorts of things at university, then you can't do your job as a researcher or as a reviewer or as a journal editor, that sort of thing. So it comes back to us, comes back right here. How many of you are professors or teach or have a lab where you teach people stuff? Okay, so I'll hear from you soon. Maybe you already add this to all of your curriculum, but whatever it is you're teaching, then you want to make sure you've included the elements of sex analysis if they're relevant, or gender analysis, or any other type of social analysis. I won't quiz you right now, but I'd love to hear about that.
Hi, thank you so much for your presentation. I was a bit terrified when you show so many examples of different products that have been designed for so many years, and it clearly hasn't had a gender perspective. But what I'm thinking today is all the products that we design right now, of course, including many AI. So my question is, as Lena mentioned before, this seems to be like a logical thing, a logical thought to have from the conception of a product, but clearly isn't. Do you have any recommendations for professionals, for practitioners who are today developing these tools? Like, what can we do in practice?
Well, funny you should ask. We created these intersectional design cards precisely for that. So you throw these cards out on the table, and at the beginning, if the team wants to, I mean, you have to have the motivation. But if they want to and they're not as familiar with it, well, that's all plastic wrapped. Sorry about the plastic. So if people want to but they're not familiar with it, this is a quick and easy way to do it. So you throw the cards out on the table. Wait, this is, okay, here they are. So we have definitions, so your team can look at the 12, intersectional factors that we chose, and we have blank cards so you can fill in other factors if that's important. And then, so your team would decide which of these factors are important for the product you're designing, right? So you choose those out, and then the second group deck here has the kinds of questions that you can ask at 4 different stages of the design process. I worked with designers. I taught at the Stanford Design School, D School, for about 12 years with 2 fabulous designers, but my designer moved back to the UK, and so. And then we have the case studies or short examples. These are all color coordinated, so you can hopefully easily see how you would use, sex in pulse oximeters is one of our examples. So people get these quick examples, and we had to fit the information on a card, right, for a whole case study. So it's quick and easy, and this is what I would recommend that research teams use. It's a tool, but you probably have other ideas.
I guess it's a follow-up question. Hi, by the way, I'm Johannes. I work at e-krona, a Swedish company working with both power garden tools and a lot of digital solutions as well.
Power, what'd you say?
Outdoor power tools.
Oh,
like,
yeah.
Robotic lawnmowers and
yeah, one of my
chainsaws
neighbors was a mechanical engineer, and he was sure I should have a chainsaw, but he got a small chainsaw for me specifically.
So that's nice. Anyway, so I was thinking, like, if I were about to start implementing this in my team, so where in the design process or innovation process would you say is like the most lean place to start in the process with this?
Well, I always think you have to start when you're setting the question. Why are you going to design this next tool, and for whom? What needs do women have? What needs do disabled people have if they can and want to do gardening? What are the needs of people? So I start right at the question stage. And then once you've decided who you're serving, then you have to think, well, who are these users? And you know, what do I need to consider about them? So I don't think ethnicity would be relevant to your tool design, but something like sex differences, so strength and size and you know, body mass, kind of muscles, that sort of thing, that seems like it would be relevant to yours. And even the gender questions might be relevant. I think that comes in the first part when you're setting your question, like who are you serving and what do they want? So that's what I think, yeah. So right away, and then it goes through the whole research process. If I were up on the internet, I would show you, we have a 5-step research process. So from the question to collecting the data, to, you know, designing your research, and so on and so on.
Thank you so much for all of the questions and for the responses, Londa. We need to take a little break. There's going to be a workshop here for those who have signed up for the workshop to work specifically with these cards. And we're going to start that workshop here with an introduction at 10 o'clock. Or, sorry, at 1 o'clock. At 1 o'clock in a few minutes. But mostly I just want to say thank you to everybody for taking time out of your lunch break to come over here and listen to this talk. And thank you very much, Londa, for the presentation. I have actually a small little Östergötland thank you present for you.
Does it fit in a suitcase?
It will fit in a suitcase. So it's just a little bit of Cloetta chocolate, the
nice.
company from here. Some ramslökssalt, which is a type of wild garlic from this area. And some Västerviks senap, mustard from the region. So thank you so much for coming all the way to Östergötland to speak with us. Thank you. And so now we'll break. And those of you who are staying for the workshop can just stay around right here.